The wing had been locked since before the Duke could remember, and dusted only outside. 4,000 whalebone stays stacked to the ceiling in a room nobody entered. The Duke had twice ordered the wing cleared and twice been refused entry. Then, in March, the works at Hull burned to the waterline overnight. The cloth in her hand was already grey with it. 15 years of dust that came back every single morning, like the door was manufacturing the stuff. Hannah Reed ran the linen down the panel, then the moulding, then the brass plate over the keyhole, and stopped there. Sleeves pinned back above the elbow with 2 brass pins. Left thumb and forefinger stained walnut brown to the knuckle, a colour no soap in Yorkshire had ever touched. Under her left arm, where it lived, a worn, brown leather-bound pattern book tied with faded red tape. Dust the door. Nothing beyond it. That was the order, and she'd kept it for 4 years without once putting her eye to the keyhole, which, if you know anything about people, is close to a miracle. Avonbury Hall was one of those houses that had decided what temperature it wanted in about 1740 and refused to negotiate. The east corridor held cold in July. You could walk it in high summer with the windows blazing white and feel the stone pull the heat out of your arms. The 4th stair from the bottom of the servants' flight creaked. Not a groan, a snap, sharp as a dry twig. So nobody in that house ever came up unannounced, which is why everybody in that house knew everything. And the east wing had been sealed since the old Duke died. 15 years. Shutters barred from inside. 2 doors nailed at the far end, 1 door left with a lock and a dusted brass plate, because the Dowager Duchess had asked for it that way, and nobody asks the Dowager Duchess why. Hannah was the stay mender. £14 a year, all found, which sounds like nothing because it was nothing, and she'd taken it gladly at 25, with a dead father and a shop in Hull that had gone under owing £41 to a bone merchant in Beverley. Her father had made stays, good ones. Then the cheap ready-made trade came down from the north like weather, and men who had cut baleen by eye for 30 years found themselves undercut by boys with a template. He died in the back room of the shop, with his measuring tapes still on the nail. She sold the fixtures for £11 and kept exactly one thing. The pattern book, tied with red tape, under her arm every day since. Now, the household's favourite entertainment. Not cards, not the fair, the Dowager. They talked about her in the still room the way you'd talk about a horse that bites. The mad old woman upstairs who bought what nobody wanted. Every year, for 15 years, a standing order to a Hull whaling agent. 260 sets of stays. Cut, unsold, out of fashion, wrong sizes, mildewed at the seams. Job lots the factors couldn't shift. She paid 1 shilling and 3pence a set and had them carted 40 miles and locked in a wing with no fire. 260 a year. 15 years. You can do that sum. Everyone at Avonbury had done it, usually out loud, usually laughing. The Duke had tried twice to have it cleared. The first time, 7 years back, he sent men with barrows and got as far as the corridor before his mother's iron ring of 4 long keys came down the passage on its black cord, and the men went home. The second time, he did it properly, through the steward, on paper, which is how gentlemen do violence. Brayfield loved that ledger. Marbled cover, held against his narrow chest like a hymnal, steel-rimmed spectacles, that permanent half-bow he did to everyone, including door frames. He had a column for it. 15 years of carriage, storage, insurance, and lost rental value on 11 rooms, totted to £4,206. And he read it aloud in the library, with actual pleasure in his voice. He'd said his piece about Hannah too, once, in the passage, not caring who heard. The mending girl handles it because the mending girl is cheap, Your Grace. One does not consult the broom about the state of the floor. He smiled while he said it. That's the part to hold on to. She heard it. She kept walking, chin down, boots quiet on the stone, and went back to the sewing room. And this is the thing about Hannah Reed. She never once argued with any of them. She just worked, and the work said it better. Watch her hands, because that's where the story actually lives. A stay is not cloth. A stay is architecture. 2 layers of coutil quilted into channels, and into each channel a strip of baleen. Whalebone, though it isn't bone at all, it's the fringe from a whale's mouth, keratin. And it does something horn will never do. Heat it, damp it, curve it to a body, and it holds the curve. Horn cracks. Horn goes brittle at the edges and splits along the grain and comes through the fabric like a splinter. Baleen bends and remembers. She slid a strip out of a channel, laid it across her thumbnail and pressed. It snapped. Dry, clean, a sound like the 4th stair. 15 years unoiled in a cold room, and the strips had gone glassy. That was the problem everyone had decided was permanent. And here's what her father taught her that nobody in that house knew. A cut stay cannot be recut. The channels are already stitched, the lengths already fixed, the curve already taken. Cut it smaller, and every channel ends in the wrong place, and the whole structure fights the body instead of holding it. Which is why 260 sets a year, in wrong sizes, are worth precisely nothing to anybody sensible. She untied the red tape that evening and opened the flyleaf, the way she did most evenings, and read the line in his hand. Nothing is wasted that is only waiting. The next morning she was back at the door with the cloth. Brass plate, moulding, panel. Nothing beyond it. Footsteps behind her. Slippers, soft, and the small, dry chime of keys. The Dowager Duchess of Avonbury stopped in the cold corridor, pale blue eyes going straight to that walnut-stained thumb, and asked her whose daughter she was. Corwin Reed's daughter, Hannah said. He cut Whalebone at the Hull Works for 22 years. He died in March. She didn't soften it. She didn't add a title to the end of it, didn't dip, didn't do the little apologetic shuffle everyone else in that corridor did when the Dowager Duchess of Avonbury looked at them for longer than 2 seconds. She stood there with her sleeves pinned back above the elbow with 2 brass pins, and her walnut-stained left thumb hooked in the pocket of her linen apron, chin slightly down, waiting. Lady Augusta Halloway did not look away. 71 years old, 5'1" in soft black kid slippers, silver white hair drawn back smooth beneath that fine black lace cap. And she studied Hannah's hand the way a jeweller studies a stone somebody's trying to pass off as glass. Then she said, "Come and drink tea. I dislike drinking it alone, and everyone in this house lies to me." The morning room takes the light from the east, which means at 9:30 it comes in flat and gold across the carpet and lands on the tea things. And by 11, it has crawled up the wall and gone. Hannah sat on the edge of a chair she had never in her life been meant to sit on. The Dowager sat rigidly upright in the straight-backed one by the window, hands folded, the iron ring of 4 long keys hanging on its black cord at her waist, and explained her method without one syllable of apology. She had been buying whalebone since 1811. Not for herself, for nobody, in fact. Her husband's factor in Hull had written to say the works were burning their cut waste, the short lengths, the split stays, the pieces that came off the blade wrong. And she had written back and asked what they wanted for it. And the answer had been 3 shillings a stay, sometimes 2 if the weather was foul and the yard was full. 15 years of that. 15 years of receipts in a japanned box, each one signed in a Hull clerk's cramped hand, each one for a sum so small it never once appeared as a line in the estate accounts, because Brayfield's ledger did not trouble itself with amounts under £1. "They called it my folly," the Dowager said, and poured. "My son's father called it that. My son calls it nothing at all, which is worse." One woman buying rubbish for 15 years out of pin money because she could not stand to watch a thing burn that had once been alive. She gave Hannah the key to the east wing, the way you'd hand someone a shovel and point at a field. Hannah went that afternoon. The corridor to the wing runs north, and the 4th stair up creaks like something waking, and the door at the top hadn't been opened since the previous winter. When it did open, the smell came first. Cold canvas, dust, and underneath it, the flat, sweetish reek of mildew. 4,000 stays. She counted the bundles before she counted anything else, because you count what you have before you weep about it. Canvas bundles stacked on timber shelving from the floor to the height of her shoulder, roped in 12s, running the whole length of a room 40 feet long. And along the north wall, where the damp had come through the pointing and never been mentioned to anyone who could have fixed it, 300 of them had gone green and furred at the ends. She set the pattern book down on a shelf, worn brown leather, faded red tape, her father's, and untied the nearest bundle. The canvas came away. She took a stay in both hands, a good one, 30 inches of baleen that had been cut and scraped by somebody in Hull who knew what he was doing. And she flexed it the way her father flexed them at the kitchen table. It broke. Not bent, not sprang. It split down the grain with a dry crack like a stick underfoot, and came apart into 3 pieces in her hands. And the pieces had that pale, mealy look along the fracture that she had seen exactly once before, on a stay her father had left too long on a windowsill in January. Baleen isn't bone. That's the first thing anybody gets wrong about it. It's keratin, the same stuff as a fingernail, laid down in plates, and like a fingernail, it wants a little moisture to stay honest. 15 years in a cold, unheated wing with a north wall drawing the damp out through it and the frost pulling the rest, and the stuff had gone brittle straight through, dried past bending. 4,000 of them, and the first one she touched turned to kindling. She sat down on the floor in her scuffed black boots and looked at the 3 pieces for a long time. That's how the Duke found her. He came up because Mrs. Penhaligon had told him somebody was in the east wing, and he had turned his signet ring twice on his smallest finger and come himself, which a man of 38 with an estate to run does not generally do. He stopped in the doorway, military straight, one hand behind his back, out of habit, even where there was no window. A woman sitting on his floor, sleeves pinned back, dark chestnut hair coming loose at the temple, broken whalebone in her lap, and 4,000 more waiting. He did not order her out. He looked at the mildew on the north wall for a while, and at the split ends of the stay in her hand, and then he went away again without saying one word, which, from Edmund Halloway, was practically a declaration. Brayfield, naturally, said several. He found the Dowager in the morning room the next day, stooped forward, ledger held against his chest like a shield, steel-rimmed spectacles catching the east light. "The wing is worth considerably more emptied, Your Grace. I have a buyer for the timber shelving. £11, cash, and he'll clear the rubbish free of charge. It's fishbone and mould."
The girl is a bone-cutter's daughter playing at business, and I'd not have the estate humoured into loss by sentiment. Some people simply don't understand what things are worth. He said it smiling with his little half-bow, in the voice men use when they think being polite makes cruelty into arithmetic. The Dowager let him finish. She let the silence sit until he had to look at his own shoes. Then she rose, walked out, found Hannah at the foot of the north stair with dust on her apron, and pressed the iron ring of 4 long keys into that stained hand, and closed her papery fingers over it. "The east wing," she said, "is now your problem." The keys were cold. That's the first thing she noticed, standing in the east wing corridor at 5:30 in the morning, with a lantern in one hand and 4 iron keys biting into her walnut-stained palm. Cold, and heavier than they looked, the way inherited problems always are. Hannah Reed set the lantern on the floorboards and opened the first door. 1,140 pieces of whalebone. She counted them over 2 days, laying them out on the long trestle in rows of 20, and the number she wrote at the bottom of the page in her father's pattern book was not 1,140. It was 406. That was the count of pieces that hadn't gone past saving. The rest had dried out in that unheated room for 9 years, until they'd lost the last of their oil and snapped at a thumb's pressure like burnt toffee. Here's the thing about baleen that nobody at those dinner tables understood. It isn't bone. It never was. It's keratin, the same stuff as a fingernail, layered and fibrous, and it behaves exactly like a fingernail does. Let it dry, and it cracks. Feed it oil and heat, and it goes soft, obedient, willing to take any curve you push into it and hold that curve forever once it cools. Her father had written the tables out in a hand that got smaller as the page went on. Length against taper. A busk at 17 inches wants a taper from 5/8 at the base to 3/8 at the tip. Side bones, 11 inches, 1/4 inch square. Beside the table, in the margin, 7 words she'd read so many times she stopped seeing them as words. Nothing is ruined until someone decides it is. So she decided otherwise. The method took her 3 weeks to build. Sperm oil rubbed into the plate with a rag, both faces, left to drink for 4 days. Then the steam, a copper kettle over a low fire, the bone held in the plume until it went from rigid to leather. And then 8 minutes exactly in the wooden clamp jig she'd built out of a broken bedstead. Cool it, release it. A piece that had been dead scrap on Monday came out on Friday with spring in it, bending under her thumb and snapping straight back. She got 14 good ones. Then she got 40 ruined. Because she'd got confident, and she'd built the fire up on a cold Thursday to move the work along faster, and heat past a certain point doesn't soften keratin. It cooks it. She lifted the batch out, and the whole lot had gone brown at the edges, brittle, smelling faintly of a hoof, and when she flexed the first one, it went to powder between her fingers. 40 pieces. Roughly 9 pounds of finished stays, gone in 11 minutes because she wanted to be quick. She didn't swear. She sat on the trestle bench with her sleeves pinned back above the elbow with those 2 brass pins, and she worked out what the fire had been doing, and by the following week she'd stopped using the fire's look at all. She used her wrist. Hold the back of the hand in the steam for a slow count of 4. If you can hold it, the bone can take it. If you flinch, pull the kettle back. Her wrist was better than a thermometer she couldn't afford anyway. And that, roughly, is when the Duke of Avonbury discovered that the East Wing existed. 4 times in 1 week he crossed the yard. Monday, to inspect a drain nobody had complained about. Wednesday, to check whether the wing's roof lead wanted replacing. He stood under it for a full minute, looking up, one hand behind his back, turning that heavy gold signet ring on his smallest finger, and then came inside and looked at the jig for 20 minutes instead. Thursday, he brought a question about the North Gate. Saturday, he brought no reason at all and didn't seem to notice he hadn't. Mrs. Penhaligon counted every one. She stood in the doorway of the still room, with her hands clasped at her waist, the brass chatelaine hanging at her hip, and said one sentence to the Dowager over the linen accounts. 4, Your Grace. In 6 days. He has never once asked after that wing in 9 years. The Dowager did not look up from her needlework. The Tuesday after, Hannah worked the whole day and into the dark, steaming, clamping, cooling, 91 pieces, her lantern burning down and the loose strands at her temple sticking to her skin. She didn't hear him come in. When she straightened, he was standing 4 feet away, charcoal coat, cravat plain, and he'd been there long enough to have watched her do the wrist test 3 times. "Hannah," he said, "you've eaten nothing since morning." Not Miss Reed. The room did not recover from that quickly. The county, meanwhile, was having a marvellous time. Lady Corvish of Marlingford got a full 3 dinner tables out of it, and she told it the same way each night, letting the paws do the work. The Avonbury Bone Room. His Grace's mother has given a seamstress a set of keys and a heap of dead fish. She'll be selling teeth next. That sort always thinks a bit of scrap makes them somebody. One hopes she enjoys it before someone tells her what she is. Somebody should have told Lady Corvish what a Wales baleen actually costs at the London docks. She'd have choked on her soup. Because here's the small noise. A seamstress mends 12 stays in a cold room and posts them to a Bath milliner she's never met, wrapped in oilcloth, at her own expense. And here's the catastrophic failure, still 9 days out and coming. Every last ounce of new baleen in England arrives through 2 ports, and one of them is about to have a very bad night. The letter came back on the 11th of March, 9 days from post to post. A Bath milliner, urgent, underlined twice. Send 200 more at your price immediately. Hannah had 406 pieces total, and not 100 finished. The Bath order sits open on the trestle table for 9 days, weighted at one corner with a lump of whalebone offcut, and Hannah reads it every morning before she lights the stove. 200 more, in a hand that pressed hard enough to score the paper.
She has 140 mended and sorted, and she is working the rest through at a rate of 18 a day, and she has not yet let herself believe the letter is real. Then the March newspapers come up from the village, folded damp, and the whole world tilts. Hull. The Kingston Works on the Humber, the great baleen cutting yard, the one that took the raw plates off the Greenland ships and split and scraped and cured and cut them into stays, burned to the waterline on the night of the 4th. 3 warehouses, the drying lofts, the steeping tanks, the whole of the season's cured stock waiting on the wharf for the London coaches. Gone. Not damaged. Gone. The report says the fire took 11 hours and the tide brought the char back up the river for 2 days after. Here is the part nobody in that valley understood yet. The Hull Works supplied 9/10 of the stays used in the London trade. 9/10. Every corset maker in Cheapside, every court dressmaker, every provincial staymaker who ordered by the gross through a London agent, all of them drank from that one well. And the well wasn't refillable. Baleen doesn't grow in a field.
It comes off a whale, and the whales come in on the Greenland fleet, and the Greenland fleet doesn't sail again until the ice opens in May and doesn't come home until September at the earliest. There is no second source. There is no substitute. There is a 5-month hole in the middle of a trade that dresses every woman in England. And in a cold East Wing room, 40 miles from anywhere that matters, sorted into pine trays by length and grade, sat 3,660 sound stays. Hannah counted them herself. Twice. Her walnut-stained left thumb moving down the trays, her lips not moving, the pattern book with its faded red tape under her arm because she never puts it down. Aunt Sarah's ledger had a phrase for stock like this: held against a scarcity that has not arrived yet. And Hannah had read it 100 times without understanding that it was a prophecy. The price when she began was nothing. Nobody would name a figure because nobody wanted them. By the 3rd week of March, London agents were bidding £4 the dozen, sight unseen, and climbing. Do that arithmetic if you like. 3,660 stays, 305 dozen, at £4 and rising. She did not do it out loud. She sorted and mended and steeped and let the letters pile up on the trestle. The Duke of Avonbury found out the way men in his position always find out: last, and from a stranger. His London solicitor wrote asking whether His Grace was aware that the largest surviving stock of cured baleen in the country appeared to be held in his own East Wing, under the personal control of the Dowager Duchess, and whether His Grace wished to give instruction. Edmund read it, standing at the library window, with one hand behind his back and the fire too hot at his knees, turning the heavy gold signet on his smallest finger. And then he read it again, because 2 things landed at once, and neither was comfortable. The first, his mother had held those keys on their black cord at her waist for 11 years, and never once mentioned what they opened. The second, and this one went in under the ribs, he had ordered that material destroyed. Twice. Once in the autumn of the year his father died, a line in a clearance schedule he initialed without reading, and once 4 years later, when Brayfield brought him a page of storage costs and used the word encumbrance. He signed. He always signed. He had spent his adult life signing things that made problems disappear, and this particular problem had survived only because a small, thin, silver-haired woman in black bombazine had quietly declined to obey him and had told absolutely no one, including him. He went and found her in the morning room, and she did not look up from her needlework. "You ordered it burnt," she said. "I ordered it counted. One of us was thinking about a spring we hadn't got to yet." He didn't have an answer, and she didn't wait for one. The letters started the week after. Houses that had laughed, that had called the hoard the mad aunt's rubbish, that had told Hannah to her face she was a woman with no name playing at a trade she couldn't spell, now wrote in the syrupy, self-abasing style, the desperate use when they think it's still negotiation. Renwick & Co. of Cheapside, who had once returned her sample dozen with a note saying they did not deal with cottage women scavenging in ruins, now wrote requesting the honour of an early interview at the Dowager's convenience. 2 bathhouses, a court dressmaker with a warrant, a gentleman from Leeds who offered to buy the entire stock at a lump sum, roughly a fifth of what it was already worth, and described this as a kindness. The Dowager answered none of them, sat rigidly upright in her straight-backed chair, hands folded, and let them stack. Brayfield came up the east corridor on the Thursday with his marbled ledger held against his chest, half bowing before he was through the door, steel-rimmed spectacles fogged from the stairs. He had spent 2 years costing that room, 9 shillings a quarter in storage, a woman on the premises at no wage and no standing, an encumbrance, he'd called it, in his own flat hand in that same ledger. He'd opened it to bring the figure to Hannah again. He had it marked with his thumb. Then he saw the trays, and the tally slate, and the London letters in a drift on the trestle, and the arithmetic he had built his whole objection on collapsed silently under him. He stood in the doorway with his mouth open, and could not finish the sentence he came to say. He turned around and walked out of it instead, ledger against his chest, spectacles catching the lamp, half a bow to nobody. The man who had spent 11 years writing surplus, valueless, in that marbled book, found he could not say the sentence out loud in a room where 3,000 pairs of mended stays sat stacked on clean deal shelving, sorted by length, tied in dozens. The letters kept coming, by the sackful now. Bath, Bristol, Norwich, 2 from Edinburgh, 1 from a modiste on Bruton Street who did not sign her own name and enclosed £4 in advance, for Whalebone, she had been told for a decade, did not exist outside the Thames whaling houses. Hannah opened them at the trestle table, with her walnut-stained left thumb splitting the wax, and answered every one in the same shorthand. Price, quantity, terms. No apology. Upstairs, the Dowager was dying, and doing it on her own schedule. She would not go to bed. She sat in the straight-backed chair by the morning-room fire, black bombazine buttoned to the throat, the velvet ribbon at her neck, the iron ring of 4 keys on its black cord at her waist, and her breath came shorter every week. Mrs. Penhaligon brought beef tea. The Dowager drank a third of it out of spite and set it down. She had her son's letters read aloud to her, and her own answers dictated in a voice like paper tearing. One afternoon in November, she watched Edmund cross the yard for the 4th time since noon, one hand behind his back, coat unbuttoned in the cold, gold ring turning on his smallest finger, and she said it to Mrs. Penhaligon without turning her silver head. "That east wing has been cold since 15 years before that girl came. My son never once complained of it. He now visits it twice a day and calls it estate business." Then she went back to her needlework. That's the whole trick of a woman like that. She sees it, names it, and returns to the hem. The system that came for Hannah did not have fangs. It had a settlement and a smile. 40 miles east, at Corvendon, there was a Miss Arabella Corvendon, Perfectly pleasant, perfectly blameless, no fault of hers in any of this. And behind her, £4,000 of Avonbury debt her family had quietly held since the old Duke's last bad year. Brayfield had drawn the papers himself. He explained them to Hannah in the storeroom doorway, with his ledger up like a shield, in the patient tone a man uses for a slow dog. "You seem to imagine," he said, "that a duke may keep a bone sorter the way another man keeps a hunting box. He is contracted, Miss Reed. You are a line item I have not yet found the correct column for. Take your bones and be grateful someone let you have them." He adjusted his spectacles and half bowed. There is a particular species of cruelty that never raises its voice, files everything correctly, and sleeps very well. And then he did the thoughtful thing, because men like Brayfield always do the thoughtful thing. He produced a letter. A position in Bath. Housekeeper to a widow of good family, £32 a year, coal found, her own room with a window. Comfortable. Respectable. Finished. It rained that night for 9 hours straight. She sat at the kitchen table at 1:30 with the offer in front of her, and a tallow candle burning down, and she was so tired her hands shook when she lifted them. £32. A warm room somebody else paid for. No baleen, no lie, no cracked steel, no ledgers full of the word valueless. She got as far as reaching for the pen. Then she pulled the pattern book toward her instead. Brown leather, faded red tape, the tape untied 1,000 times, and opened it where the hand stopped mid-page. Nothing is ruined until someone decides it is. She blew the candle out and went to bed, and in the morning she wrote to Bruton Street about a shipment of 40 dozen. Here's the part you came for. The proof was never a speech. The proof was 3,000 mended stays on clean shelving in an east wing that had been a mausoleum for Whalebone since the last Duchess died. Sorted, whipped in linen, greased against damp, catalogued in a hand nobody in that house had authorised. The proof was £640 of orders on the trestle by Christmas. And the proof was the stove she bought with her own money in the second week of December, and the flue she had swept, and the fact that on the 22nd of that month the east wing of Avonbury was warm for the first time in 15 years. Mrs. Penhaligon walked through it, put a hand on the wall, and said nothing at all, which from her was a standing ovation. There was one ball. There is always one ball. The county came. 240 candles made the air thick and sweet and slightly sickening, and the Corvendons were placed exactly where the mathematics of the room demanded. Hannah was there because the Dowager sent Mrs. Penhaligon down with a grey silk and one sentence of instruction. She wore it badly and stood well, upright, chin slightly down, one strand loose at the temple, as always, the pale thumbprint birthmark below her left jaw, that left thumb still walnut brown and no glove long enough to hide it. He crossed the room, not quickly. He asked with his eyes, and she gave him her stained hand, and their fingers met in the turn of the dance, and neither one of them let go on the beat, where letting go was correct. Half the room noticed. All of Brayfield noticed. Midnight, and he came to the storeroom in his shirt-sleeves with the signet ring turning, and stopped among the shelves and did not stand at the window. "I have a title, £4,000 of debt, and a contract with Corvendon.
he said. "I have told them tonight that I will not honour it. I have nothing to offer you but the work and myself, and I want both, in writing, on your terms." She set down the bone she was holding. "Then we begin Monday," she said. "And you'll take the debt to my ledger, not yours." Morning came in grey and honest, and neither of them bothered to lie about the night. The keys were still where she'd set them down, the iron ring, 4 long keys on their black cord, lying on the trestle table between a bowl of soaking cane and a coil of waxed thread. Hannah didn't move them. Edmund didn't pick them up. They stood on either side of that table the way people stand when the whole architecture of pretending has come down in the dark and nobody's swept the pieces yet. Her sleeves were still pinned back above the elbow with the 2 brass pins. Her left thumb and forefinger were still walnut brown to the knuckle. He turned the gold signet ring on his smallest finger once and stopped and left his hands alone. 6 days later, he ended the Kelvedon match in front of 40 people at a dinner in Bath, standing, plainly, without a single decorative word. He said the engagement had been made on his behalf and not by him, that the fault was entirely his, and that he would not be shifted. He offered to meet any cost the family named. They named one. He paid it, £11,000 in 3 instalments, and it gutted the timber money for 2 seasons. The county went quiet. Not kind quiet. Which brings us to John Brayfield, estate steward, stooped and half-bowing, small oval spectacles catching the window light. Marbled ledger held against his chest, like a shield he'd never once had to use. Understand who this man was. For 11 years he had run the Avonbury accounts, and he had, personally, ordered the Whalebone cleared out of the East Wing as refuse. When Hannah first came with her father's pattern book under her arm and asked for the wing, Brayfield had looked at the walnut stain on her hand and said, warmly, kindly, in the voice men use when they think they're doing you a favour, "You must understand, the estate cannot indulge every tradesman's daughter who fancies herself in commerce. Take the shilling and be grateful. Girls like you don't hold ground." Girls like you. He never raised his voice once. Cruelty rarely needs to. And here is how he lost. Not with a shout, not with a scandal. The Dowager Duchess sent for her solicitor on a Tuesday, and by Friday, the East Wing, all 9 rooms, the yard, the drying shed, the well, was deeded outright to Hannah Reed for a term of 99 years at a peppercorn rent. Lady Augusta sat rigidly upright in her straight-backed chair, black bombazine, silver-white hair smooth beneath the fine black lace cap, her own iron keys at her waist, and watched her son read the deed. She said one thing to him. Just one. "You crossed that yard 4 times on Tuesday. Do not tell me now that you're deciding." Then she went back to her needlework, and Edmund, 38 years old, a duke, stood at the window with one hand behind his back and could not think of a reply. Brayfield still had his position. He simply had nothing left to do with it. Because the orders started coming. Nobody apologised. That is not how the county works. Mrs. Averill of Thornstoke, who had once called the stayworks that unpleasantness behind the house, sent a note requesting 4 pairs, measurements enclosed, terms accepted in advance. The Hasketh sisters came in person, and Lady Marchmont, who had laughed out loud at a card table 2 winters back, stood in the drying shed among the steam and the walnut smell, and asked, with real curiosity, no condescension anywhere in it, how the cane was tempered so it took the curve of a woman's back without breaking. Hannah showed her. Held the cane over the vat, bent it slow, let her feel the give. That's the whole apology. That question. Take it. They married in July, in a stone church that holds the cold in its walls all summer, with 11 people present and no flowers to speak of. Mrs. Penhaligon stood at the back with her hands clasped at her waist, weight square on both feet, brass chatelaine glinting, crying and refusing to admit it. The Dowager sat upright in the front row and did not lean on anything. Hannah wore grey. Of course she did. She'd pinned her sleeves down for the occasion, which everyone who knew her understood to be the grandest gesture she was capable of. Now let the years run. 12 women work the East Wing. 2 on cane, 3 on bone cutting, 4 stitchers, 1 on the ledgers, 2 in the drying shed. Wages paid weekly, £40 a year for the senior hands, which is more than a governess sees, and everybody knows it. 940 pairs shipped last season to Bath, London, Norwich, and one very insistent house in Edinburgh. The waiting list stands at 11 months. Brayfield left the county years ago for a smaller post in Shropshire, and if that reads as a downfall, it is. The quiet kind, where the world simply stops needing you and doesn't bother to say so. Hannah is 51 now, grey coming in at the temple, hair still centre-parted, still pinned in a low, twisted knot with the same strands escaping. The birthmark below her left jaw is a little softer. Her left thumb is walnut brown, and always will be.
Edmund is 60, and he still crosses the yard 4 times a day with no excuse whatsoever, and the staff have long since stopped pretending it's about the accounts. Autumn morning, same door, the one with the swollen frame that sticks in wet weather. A young woman waits there, 22, sharp-eyed, 3 years at the bone-cutting bench and the best pair of hands in the room. Hannah lifts the iron ring off her waist. 4 long keys, black cord, worn smooth. "They told my father to dust this wing out and burn what was left," she says, and puts them in the girl's palm. "You'll be the one deciding what stays." Then her father's line, one last time, the way it was written in the pattern book, in a hand that stops mid-page. "Nothing is ruined until someone decides it is." The door sticks. The girl shoulders it open, and somewhere behind her, a man at a window turns.